Typically, when the United Kingdom issues a travel advisory, it's because of a health crisis or a civil war. Well, maybe not anymore. Because just 2 months ago, the government of the United Kingdom issued a travel advisory to their citizens coming to the United States, specifically to the states of North Carolina and Mississippi, because of recent discriminatory laws against the LGBT community. The New York Times explains on April 20th of 2016 that these controversial laws, like Mississippi House Bill 1623 or North Carolina House Bill 2, which are commonly known as bathroom bills, not only restrict the bathrooms that transgendered people can use, but often, more importantly, allow and try to cement the right of people in those states to discriminate in the cases of housing, employment, or government treatment against gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people. But the federal government hasn't exactly gone over well with this. The statements from President Obama calling these laws discriminatory and hateful, considering that for the over 9 million Americans who publicly identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, protection from the government is what they have been fighting for since Stonewall. It is imperative that we ask the question, what action can the federal government take in response to North Carolina and Mississippi's LGBT bills? And the answer is the federal government should take actions to protect the LGBTQ community, specifically for 3 key reasons. First, because the federal government can apply private sector pressure. Second, because the federal government can cut funding. And third, because they can just sue. In the United States, we have something called the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act makes it illegal to discriminate against people on the basis of sex, religion, age, race, ethnicity, or creed. But the first reason why the United States federal government should be taking action in order to protect the LGBT community in these states is because they have the power to apply private sector pressure. The International Business Times explains on April 20th of 2016 that America's musical icon Pearl Jam recently decided to cancel one of his concerts in North Carolina. And this is only one example of a slew of recent corporations, private sector events that have been moved away from these states. And the federal government can encourage this. As the New York Times notes on April 22nd of 2016, although the federal government has no technical say over the private sector, they do have political influence to encourage corporations that already want to move events out of these states to do so. Considering that these events have already cost states like North Carolina over $2.5 million, there is an powerful incentive for these states to change when private sector pressure is attached. Haywood Sanders notes in his 2014 book, Convention Center Follies, that billions of dollars have been invested in convention centers like the ones that we are standing in, under the presumption that if they build it, they will come. Because the federal government can apply private sector pressure to keep people out of these convention centers, there's a powerful incentive for states to change their laws. In the 1987 case of South Dakota v. Dole, the United States Supreme Court decided that the federal government can tie highway funding to a drinking age law because the federal government is allowed to mildly coerce the states through funding. The second reason why the federal government should be taking actions to protect the LGBTQ community, especially in the states of North Carolina and Mississippi, is because they can cut funding. The Wall Street Journal explains on May 5th of 2016 that as Mississippi and North Carolina are some of the largest beneficiaries of federal funding in the nation, there is a powerful incentive for them to stay on the good sides of those in charge of federal funding, like Attorney General Loretta Lynch. But as the New York Times notes on May 5th of 2016, considering that these states are likely in violation of the Civil Rights Act, Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, has decided that she wants to sue them, and in doing so has issued a deadline to the states that has long passed to not enact the law, or else she has threatened to cut over $500 million of federal funding from these states. And while that may not seem like much, and while it won't necessarily change the laws in these states, the Urban Institute explains on April 29th of 2016 that what's more important is that it provides a powerful incentive for other states to not adopt these laws. Because the federal government can just cut funding, they can provide a powerful incentive for these states, North Carolina and Mississippi, to protect LGBTQ rights, as well as other states. America is often criticized for being an incredibly sue-happy nation. So maybe we can finally put our lawsuits to a good use. The third and final reason why the federal government should take action to protect LGBT rights in the states of North Carolina and Mississippi is because they can just sue. The Columbia Law Review explains on April 5th of 2016 that over a dozen legal professors from around the nation have all written into the courts and the Justice Department saying that these laws in North Carolina and Mississippi violate the Civil Rights Act, the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution, due process and equal protection, and the 14th Amendment. And this is exactly the strategy that the federal government is using. Because as explained by the Washington Post on May 6th of 2016, both North Carolina and Mississippi are currently being sued by the Department of Justice on the grounds that they violate all of these provisions. And this is incredibly important for the protection of LGBTQ rights around the country. Because as noted by the Brookings Institution on June 1st of 2016, even if the federal government doesn't win in the courts, which it will, it wins in the court of public opinion, applying political pressure around the country for the prevention of these laws in other states. If the job of the federal government is to protect the people, then it's about time that the federal government start protecting all of the people. So, when returning to the question, what action should the federal government take in response to LGBT laws in North Carolina and Mississippi? The answer is that they should take everything they can to protect LGBT rights. First, because they can apply private sector pressure. Second, because they can cut funding. And third, because they can just sue. For the millions of gay Americans who need the protection of government, now is the time to do it. Because as a young gay man, I shouldn't have to be issued a travel advisory to go to another part of my country.
Speaker 293 will now be cross-examined by 118.
Marshall.
Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Thanks, you too. So let's talk about your first point. Given the fact that, for example, when Indiana wanted to enact anti-LGBT laws, private sector companies already decided to pull out. How is the federal government applying any sort of pressure actually going to make a difference?
Well, it's going to make a difference, first because there's economic incentives for states to keep the private sector there, but also because it creates more political pressure. Even Donald Trump said that these laws are stupid because they hurt the economy. And that's something that appeals to conservatives and liberals alike.
But if the private sector is already doing this on its own, why is the federal government even needed?
While the private sector is doing it on its own, right now the state of North Carolina has only lost about $2.5 million out of over $20 billion of tourism every year. So there's a lot more that can be done.
All right, let's talk about your second point. For example, let's say the United States decides to cut funding from North Carolina. Wouldn't it allow North Carolina to accuse the federal government of making this issue political, which gives the state governments more, for example, popularity with some of its citizens?
Well, first of all, every issue in politics is inherently political. But at the same time, what this does is it creates a message for other states to not do the same thing. It's a carrot and stick approach. This is the stick.
But if it doesn't actually change anything in places like North Carolina, then isn't that actually not effective?
Well, it does change things in North Carolina because it provides them a powerful incentive, and a very visceral one, to change the laws. But it also prevents further such laws around the country, and I think that should be a priority too.
However, if it continues to cement public support for these types of bathroom bills, won't that directly contradict what the federal government is trying to achieve?
Well, as I explained in my third point, the federal government has already won in the court of public opinion. The vast majority of Americans believe that these laws are discriminatory, and applying pressure through public funding isn't going to change that.
Okay.
Awesome. Congratulations.